What's going on, everybody? Welcome into week 3 of college football roundup. I'm American Football Network, joined with co-host the football expert. Make sure you guys subscribe to both of those channels as well as our college football roundup channel, which this video is on. As this is week 3 of our podcast, like we mentioned, we got a close battle so far. As I won week 1, I went 17-3. You went 13-7. Week 2, you went 17-3. I went 14-6. So coming into week 3, I'm 31-9 overall on the season. You are 30-10 on the season. Just one game separates us. Nice winning percentages there for us. We've done a little bit better this year than we have the past 2 years. Not a lot of big games this season. Or this week. There has been some big games this season that we've disagreed on and picked against. So that's been fun. But what are your thoughts so far on college football and in general in Notre Dame?
So basically, I'll start with this. My thoughts on the Fighting Irish as we get into week 3 is very high. I am very glad on what I have seen with this team. I think the offensive line, I was a little bit concerned last week a little bit with NC State, but I also think with the exotic blitzes that Tony Gibson brought, I think that that's probably the most exotic blitzes that you'll see all season, except maybe Clemson, maybe Ohio State, but I think overall the teams looked good. The offense has settled down in that NC State game and is averaging 47.7 points per game. Looking good overall, both on the run game. Sam Hartman looking like a possible Heisman contender. But speaking of Heisman contenders, throughout college football, you've seen a lot of star performances from Quinn Ewers at Alabama, but even bigger star performances from Shakur Sanders and Travis Hunter from Colorado. So you're really looking at a college football environment that really has a lot going for it right now. And the funny thing is, looking back on it, is that even with this being the Pac-12's last season and the SEC improving, it's really actually been, if you're honestly looking at it, the best conference is the Pac-12, and then the second best one is either the Big 12, maybe the ACC, or the Big 10. Like the SEC is probably the third or fourth best conference in football right now, based on kind of how you're looking at it with non-conference games and stuff like that. They're just not playing well. So it has definitely been kind of an upside-down college football season, as it is the last season with the normality that we've come to expect here in the past decade or so of college football.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the ACC potentially being the second or third best. I mean, if Clemson is even without Clemson being 2-0, they're 1-1 right now, lost to Duke. It's crazy that you can still say the SEC, the ACC is potentially the second best conference, just with the teams that they have in there. With Duke looking great, they didn't have a quarterback throw an incomplete pass on Saturday. You have North Carolina, whose defense is actually looking really, really solid so far early on into the season. Only gave up 24 to App State, and then you look at least in regulation. And then you look at the South Carolina game, they gave up, I believe, 24 in that one too, or 17, I think it actually was. So, and had 9
Yeah.
sacks in that first game. So the North Carolina defense is looking really good. Then, obviously Florida State up top with a big win against LSU. But you mentioned the Pac-12. 8 teams in the AP top 25 for heading into week 3. They've been lighting it up in their last season. I know they started out week 1, they were 13-0, didn't have a single team lose in week 1. Now you look at number 5, they have USC. At number 8, they have Washington. At 12, they have Utah. 13, Oregon. At 16, Oregon State. At 18, Colorado. At 23, Washington State. At 24, UCLA. 8 teams in the top 25 for a team that this is their final, or for a conference that this is their final season, is just, that's pretty incredible. And it's a big year for the Pac-12. You look at the Big Ten, they got 3 inside the top 7, but they, Ohio State doesn't really look good. this season.
No, they
We'll see what
haven't.
Penn State turns out to be. Michigan's kind of been the only one holding steady. Um, Even offensively, though, they don't look great. They only put up 35 against UNLV and I believe 35 against East Carolina too.
Correct.
They were
Yeah.
yeah, they were in the 30s against East Carolina as well. But the defense looking solid. So I think it's pretty clear to say the Pac-12 is the best conference now. Now we'll see how it holds up throughout the whole season, but it's been a fun and kind of unexpected year in college football. There's been a lot of just crazy stuff that has happened, and so I mean I'm all for it. I love it. I think
Yeah.
that this has been a very entertaining year, a lot like last year has. But let's go ahead and let's jump into this week's games as we look. Like we mentioned, I'm 31-9, you're 30-10. I got a slim 1 game lead on you, and not a whole lot of disagreement in the games this week. Is there's just not really a whole lot that are disagreeable games in this one. Is not a lot of big matchups. But our first game, Friday night game, Army at UTSA. Who you taking in that one?
This is a game that I went back and forth on, and it's a game that I kind of want to disagree on with you. But it's just, I've gone back and forth on this game, but I'm going to go with the Roadrunners in this matchup because of home field advantage. If this game was being played at West Point up in New York, I'm taking the Black Knights. But with it being played in UTSA, I'm going to give the Roadrunners an advantage, though I will say home field advantage is not going to be as much of a factor because it is a Friday night game in Texas. That means that high school football is probably going to take priority over UTSA. So that could be an interesting factor, but we'll
Which is
kind of
just
see.
even crazy to think.
Yeah.
Which is just crazy to think that a D1 school has to compete with high school football, but that's how it is out in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it would even be that kind of way in some parts of South Carolina to a degree as well. Like I think that Clemson would probably win out over most high school teams, but there are that you would probably not get a sellout game if you're playing a bad team.
Oh no, not a sellout game, but Clemson would definitely have, 60,000 plus in the stands.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, and I mean, you look at a team like a Furman. There's a chance that Furman barely has anybody show up to that. Now I know Furman's FCS. They're not they're not FBS, but I mean that's still a D1 program that would lose out a lot of their fans for high school football for sure.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I am going to take the Roadrunners in this matchup, but by the slimmest of margins.
Yeah, I went back and forth on this one as well. I just worry about UTSA's physicality when facing Army. But I trust the veteran leadership from Frank Harris. I trust that offense for UTSA. The defense worries me a little bit, but I do think the Roadrunners will come out. But I think this is going to be a very fun, close Friday night matchup here for Army UTSA. Next up, we got Penn State at Illinois. What are your thoughts on this game, and who are you taking?
With this game preseason, I was taking the Fighting Illini, but after watching 2 weeks of Fighting Illini football, I'm not so high on Illinois this season. Like, they have definitely disappointed me a little bit. I thought the Kansas loss was fair. Like, it was a game that I was 50-50 on going into the season. And I think I took Illinois, but it was by the slimmest of margins. In Roundup, I did pick Kansas to win that game last week, but it was really a week one matchup against Toledo. They didn't look that good. And I don't see him beating Penn State, though this could be an upset alert. This could be. Depends on how good Penn State is.
Yes, I think this game is really going to be about how good Penn State is, not how good Illinois is, as they've struggled the first 2 weeks. Like you mentioned, against Toledo did not look good at all, and then obviously Kansas beat them last week, and that was one of our roundup games. We both took Kansas in that one. But you look at this Penn State team, what are they? And Illinois' run defense is still going to be solid. They got Big Jazar Newton up there headlining that defensive line, potentially a top 10 draft pick. Penn State is gonna have to show up and play in this one, or else it's not gonna be good for them if they don't. They're gonna have to really play in this game, especially with this being at Illinois. But I think that they will. I think Penn State will get the win, and I think they win by about 17 points, something around that margin. I think Aller has a good game. Next up, we got LSU at Mississippi State. What are your thoughts on this one, and who are you going to take?
Even though big game Brian Kelly showed up against Florida State, small game Brian Kelly will probably show up in this game and will beat Miss State. I think that when you look at Miss State, they struggled against Arizona at home, so I just don't see a win against a much more dynamic LSU team. And I think that LSU is able to get the W here by beating Miss State. I think that Brian Kelly, he's good at beating the teams he's supposed to, and he's bad at beating the teams he is not supposed to beat. So I think that LSU does get the W in this matchup.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I wanted to go with Mississippi State in this one. They got a nice home field advantage. They got a good, solid team, but I I just think LSU's more talented, and again, like you mentioned, it's a big game. Brian Kelly. This is a team he's supposed to beat, so he's probably gonna beat them. I think LSU is just gonna be a little bit more physical, make a few more plays than Mississippi State does. I think LSU wins, but I don't think this is gonna be a blowout either way. I think
Agree.
that LSU probably wins by 10 points, something like that.
Yeah,
Next up,
agree.
we got Kansas State at Missouri. What are your thoughts on this game?
Kind of another one of these border war matchups that generally you see at the end of the season, but this one being a former Big 12 rivalry. I think that Kansas State is not happy that the Missouri Tigers left the Big 12 and headed to the SEC. I got the Kansas State Wildcats in this one. They looked good against a solid Troy team, and I think Kansas State is one of my favorites to win the Big 12. So I am going to go with the Wildcats in this one.
Yes, I agree. Um I'm going with Kansas State. You look at Missouri, beat South Dakota in the first week 35-10. Okay, that's you you didn't blow them out, but you got a nice win. Then you look at this past weekend, they beat Middle Tennessee State 23-19 at home. That is a little bit worrisome because Kansas State is a lot better than Middle Tennessee State, and Kansas State is gonna probably put up 35 points at the very least. So Missouri's gonna have to score some points, and I'm just not sure they're gonna be able to score enough to come away with the win in this one. So yeah, I'm going with Will Howard and the Kansas State Wildcats. I think they get the win here at Missouri, and what should be a pretty interesting matchup. I don't think it's going to really be a blowout, but I do think it'll, by the end of the game, Kansas State will feel safe about their lead. Next up, we got South Carolina at Georgia. What are your thoughts on this one, and who do you have winning this game?
Similar to what you kind of said about Kansas State and Missouri, I think this is a game that could be interesting for a couple of quarters, but I think by the end of it, I think that the horrificness of the South Carolina offensive line is really what does South Carolina in. But here's the interesting thing. Mike Bobo and that offense has really struggled to be explosive and be able to get points on the board early. I could see South Carolina jumping out to a lead here and scaring some people, but I think Georgia's too physical in order to lose this game.
Yeah, I agree. I just think Georgia's going to have too much, particularly defensively. We look at what North Carolina's defense did to South Carolina's offensive line. Now you have five-star defensive linemen out here for Georgia against this same South Carolina offensive line that really didn't even look better against Furman. I mean, Furman was beating South Carolina for a for a while in that game um, on Saturday, and you're telling me that they're somehow going to compete with Georgia? I don't think so. I mean, that South Carolina Furman game was a little bit like the Clemson Charleston Southern game, except Furman was actually moving the football and putting points on the board. You look at going into halftime, South Carolina was up 27-14, but for the majority of the first half, that game was tied. or South Carolina was losing in that one. And I don't think that they're going to be able to compete with Georgia. I would feel a little bit better for South Carolina if this game was a home game for them, but going on the road to Athens against the number one team in the country. And yes, Georgia's had a bit of their struggles this season, but they've still looked pretty good, a lot better than South Carolina has. I think the Bulldogs win here pretty easily by the end of the game. Next up, East Carolina at App State. What are your thoughts on this one? Who you taking in it?
This one, I'm going to go with the Mountaineers. They've impressed me last week when they played North Carolina. They seem to always play North Carolina close, so I think that's definitely a big uh, thing there for the Mountaineers to play an in-state game against a Power Five opponent. But I think at the end of the day, this is a Group of Five opponent in state, and I just don't think East Carolina has the firepower to be able to keep up with App State, even though I think App State does have their own struggles.
Oh yeah, I agree. I don't see East Carolina having the weapons really to do much against the East or the App State Mountaineers. Like you said, it's a home game for App State. They have a pretty solid home field advantage, especially for a group of five school. Their fans are going to show out. We saw what they did last year against North Carolina as far as fans go. Obviously, this isn't a big of a game, but they tailgate up there and they show out for their football team. And this App State team, like you mentioned, they just went in, I believe, double overtime versus North Carolina
Correct.
this past Saturday.
Yep.
Um, and so it was crazy game. Again, one of the most exciting and entertaining games this season, just like it was last year. I think App State is a solid team. I like you said, they have their own struggles, but I'm just not liking East Carolina's offense this season without Holt Nailors, C.J. Johnson, and now I'm blanking on the running back's name. Great. Um, Yeah, I can't. I'm blanking on his name, but without those three guys, that was a lot of their offense gone, and I'm just not liking the way that they've played so far this season. I think App State has clearly been the better football team. Next up, we got the Hokies of Virginia Tech taking on the Scarlet Knights of Rutgers. Who you got in this one?
Keaton Mitchell was the one that I think you were looking for with East
Yes,
Carolina.
Keaton Mitchell. That's right, Keaton
But
Mitchell. Yeah.
with this matchup, I think it's going to be one that we're going to disagree on. I got the Rutgers Scarlet Knights in this one. I'm not a big fan of Brent Pry. I am solidly behind Greg Schiano, so I'm going to kind of go with that. It's a risky pick, but Rutgers is also playing at home in Piscataway, so I do like that as well.
Oh yeah, I think that Virginia Tech has definitely had their struggles this season, but I think Rutgers has too. We needed to disagree on some games. I'm 50-50 split on this one, so give me the Hokies of Virginia Tech. I'm not a big fan of Burnt Pry either, just for the record. Um, I do like Shiano better, but I think both of these teams are pretty bad, and so I didn't. We'll 50-50 split, make it interesting, and disagree on it. Next up, we got San Diego State at number 16, Oregon State. Who you got in this one?
This is a game that I kind of wanted to disagree on with you and kind of pick the upset and go with the San Diego State Aztecs. But the Aztecs just haven't looked good this season. They barely beat Ohio in week 0. They beat Idaho State, which is not a great FCS team, by only 8 points at home. And then you lost to UCLA by 25. I just can't honestly pick San Diego State in this matchup, so I do have to go with the Beavers.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I wanted to think San Diego State in this one, but they're just not going to be able to pull off the upset here. Oregon State has looked great this season. I know they haven't really played much of anybody, but they have looked really good, which is something a lot of teams haven't done. A lot of these teams have been playing these nobody teams and have not done very good against them at all. So, I think it's a good sign for sure for Oregon State, the way that they've been playing, and I think they continue rolling here against San Diego State. I think they probably beat them by 20 plus points here. Next up, we got Tulane at Southern Miss. Thoughts on this one and who you taking?
I got the Green Wave in this one. The Green Wave almost beat Old Miss. Yeah, it was a home game, but they also didn't have their starting quarterback in Michael Pratt. So I think Pratt will be back for this game. So I am going to pick Tulane to win this game. Southern Miss did not look great against Florida State, but that's to be expected. But Southern Miss is going to probably rely very heavily on Frank Gore Jr., their running back, who is the son of Frank Gore Sr., the all-time great running back for the NFL, San Francisco 49ers, Buffalo Bills, stuff like that. So I'm going to go with Tulane in this matchup.
Oh yeah, I'm going Tulane too. They battled against a very good Ole Miss team last week with, like you mentioned, without their starting quarterback. And even if he's not back for this game, I still think Tulane beats Southern Miss. They just, I mean, they showed last weekend that their offense does not live off of him, which I thought was definitely something you love to see out of your team as a fan. So I mean, give me the Green Wave. I think they win this game by 17 plus points. Next up, we got Vanderbilt at UNLV. Who you got in this one?
I got the Commodores in this one. I think Vandy goes up to 3-1. I think Vandy looked decent against Wake Forest. I don't think they looked fantastic. They didn't get the win in that matchup, but they did kind of hang around and they played some decent football. But they're just not explosive enough to beat Wake Forest. I got another win here for the Commodores, though. I just think UNLV, they're a bad team.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think you got UNLV, probably one of the worst FBS teams there is right now. And I just think Vanderbilt has more talent. I think they're a better football team, and I think that they'll come away with a win here in this one easily. This is a game that may be a little close for a little bit, but at the end of the day, Vanderbilt's going to pull away and win by two plus touchdowns. Next up, Georgia Tech at Ole Miss. This is a game that Georgia Tech did not even score a single point in last year at home. Who you got in this one this year?
This is a no doubter. Old Miss with the W. Old Miss has a dynamic offense. They'll get some points up on the board. I could see another 50 or 60 spot here from the Rebs.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just not a big fan of Georgia Tech's defense. I think Ole Miss has, they have a top 10 offense in the country. They do, and they're going to put a lot of points on a lot of teams this season and really put the pressure on them. I think Ole Miss, like you said, probably puts up 50, 60, maybe even 70 points in this game, and they're going to beat Georgia Tech by it. I mean, at least 35 points, at least 5 plus touchdowns. And I just don't think Georgia Tech has anywhere near the offensive capability to keep up with Ole Miss, and their defense is not going to be able to stop them. They're just not. So yeah, give me the Rebels. Next up, BYU at Arkansas. Who you got in this game?
Uh, with this game, I'm going to go with Arkansas. BYU definitely has their struggles. In Arkansas, there's no doubt that Arkansas also has some struggles. They didn't play great in week 1 or in week 2 when they were playing Kent State. They definitely did struggle, but I'm just going to have to go with the Razorbacks and KJ Jefferson kind of putting this team on his back and getting another W.
Yep, I agree with you here. I'm going with Arkansas. I like the leadership that Jefferson and Sanders bring at quarterback and running back duo. Not a big fan of Keaton Slovis at BYU, and I think Arkansas is the better football team. It's a home game for them. I think that helps even more. I think Arkansas wins by 10 points or more in this one. Next up, we got TCU at Houston. What are your thoughts on this game?
With this game, I got the Horned Frogs. I think that the Horned Frogs definitely were overrated when it came to the poll this season, but they're not that bad. They're not bad enough to lose to Houston. I think that TCU gets their first win over Houston as a conference opponent.
Oh yeah. I agree. I think that TCU picks up the win in the Big 12 this season against the Houston Cougars. Houston looks solid week 1 against UTSA defensively, offensively still. just kind of struggling. But the defense is looking really good. But I think that TCU's offense is just going to be too much, and TCU has the defense to slow Houston's offense down and hold them to about 20 points or less. And I think that TCU is definitely going to put up more than 20 points. I think that's almost a given. So yeah, give me the Horned Frogs. Next up, Kansas at Nevada. Who you got?
Kansas, and I think Kansas wins big as long as you have Jaden Daniels as your quarterback. I can't imagine a team that depends more on their starting quarterback being healthy than Kansas and Jaden Daniels. I think it's Jason Bean. I may be wrong on the last name. I know Bean, but he plays well. Like, he's not bad, but he does not have the passing capability of anything special when it comes to Kansas. Kansas will struggle in this game if Daniels isn't able to play, but if Bean plays, they'll still win. But I think Kansas will win much bigger if Daniels plays.
Yeah, Bean is one of those guys who is, um, he's one of those guys that won't. He's not going to lose you the game, but he's also not going to come out here and make any plays to help you win the game either. So I think that that this is a game that either way, um, whether Jalen Daniels plays or not, this is going to be a game that that the Jayhawks win pretty easily. They beat Illinois last weekend 34-23 at Illinois, I believe.
No, that game was at
So I
Kansas.
it was at Kansas. Okay. Um, so I think even going to Nevada, maybe the travel's a little bit, but Nevada's not a good team. Kansas is going to win this game pretty easily. Next
Yeah.
up, we got Colorado State at Colorado, the biggest storyline right now in college football, the Colorado Buffaloes. What's your take on this game?
They're going to be 3-0. They're going to be 3-0. Jay Norvell is a solid coach, but he does not have the talent that Deion Sanders has. Shakur Sanders is going to put up another like 500 spot passing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a game where Colorado drops 50 points. Travis Hunter, Shador Sanders, great games. And I think Colorado, like you said, moves on to be 3-0. Game day will be at this one, so the crowd's gonna be insane there already. I mean, it already was last week for Dion's first game there. It's gonna be the partying and tailgating and all that is gonna be even crazier now that game day's coming. I think Colorado wins big. Next up, we got Fresno State at Arizona State. Who are you taking in this game?
I was wrong once about Fresno State this year, so I am not going to doubt the Bulldogs again. I'm going to go with Fresno State.
I've been debating back and forth on this game between Fresno State and Arizona State, but I'm gonna go with Arizona State. It's a home game for them. We'll see how much of that plays into effect. But their offenses look really good so far this season. I know Fresno State's offense has been solid. I do think Fresno State has a very solid defense, but I think that this is going to be a higher scoring game, and I think Arizona State is going to be able to outscore them in this one and come away with a close win. I think this is going to be one of the closer games this week. Next up, we got UTEP at Arizona. Who you got in this one?
This one, I'm going to go with the Wildcats. The Wildcats played well. They did disappoint me by losing last week, even though I picked them over Miss State. But overall, they played well. They look decent. As long as Jaden Delora doesn't have too many mistakes like he did against Miss State, throwing 4 interceptions, they should be good.
Oh yeah, and honestly, I think he could probably throw 3 or 4 interceptions and them still beat UTEP.
Probably, probably.
I just UTEP is not a good team. I think Arizona is going to be able to get the win in this one, and so yeah, I'm going with the Wildcats. Now to our big three games of the week. Starting off, we got the backyard brawl, Pitt at West Virginia. Who you got in this one?
I got to go with Pitt once again to sweep this backyard draw series or backyard uh, brawl series. I think that Pitt gets the W. I think West Virginia needs to fire Neil Brown.
I agree. I don't like Neil Brown at all as a coach. I don't think West Virginia has really the offense or the defense to play with Pitt. I think it could be a closer game. for a little bit, just because it is a huge rivalry. It's at West Virginia. The fans are definitely going to show up. It's going to be a crazy atmosphere, but I do think Pitt will come away with the win and end up winning by 10 plus points. Next up, in our second Big Three game, we got Tennessee at.
So with this game, I'm definitely going to go with Tennessee, even though I think that this is definitely a close game. Tennessee almost lost to Florida last year, so I am really debating on whether this is a Florida victory. They almost did win last year, but I am going to go with Tennessee, even despite their struggles against Austin Peay this year. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going with Tennessee in this game. I just their offense hasn't been what it's been last year, what it was hyped up supposed to be this year, but it's still been much better than Florida's. I think that Tennessee is going to win this game and pull away towards the end. I just don't think Florida's in a very good spot right now to really do much. So yeah, give me the Volunteers. Now, probably one of the weirder matchups. Who even scheduled this game? Minnesota at North Carolina. That is our third Big Three game. One of the more interesting games, and just why are these teams playing each other? But who you got in this one?
In this matchup, I got the Tar Heels. You got to go with the Tar Heels. Just offensively, are too dynamic for Minnesota to really get much of a W here. So I am going to go with the Tar Heels. Just not much to say about these Big Three matchups. Is kind of all of them are kind of solidified one way or another. Though I did make a 10-minute video out of Tennessee and Florida, though that was hard to do.
Yeah, I bet that was a hard one to talk about. As that's just a crazy game, um, to even talk about, because it's one of the bigger games this week. But like, what even is Florida? What are they even gonna
Yeah,
do in this game? I don't see them doing much. But yeah, to Minnesota, North Carolina. This is a weirder matchup, but North Carolina's obviously going to win this game. They just have too much offense for Minnesota. Although this is a game that I could see Minnesota keeping it a little bit close, just with their physicality on offense. We'll see how physical that North Carolina defense is, because they've played good through the first 2 weeks, but they haven't really played a physical team. Obviously, South Carolina's offensive line was sorry and pathetic. They gave up 9 sacks. App State, not they're just not going to be that physical with a North Carolina team. And so it'll be interesting to see if Minnesota is able to make this a Big Ten West type game and keep the scoring low. But I just don't see that. I think maybe for a half it could be lower scoring, but I think in the end North Carolina's offense is going to start clicking, and they're going to put up a 35, 40 something points and come away
agree.
with the win here. And I don't see Minnesota's offense being able to put that much up. Um, but yeah, so that wraps up this episode of College Football Roundup. Any closing thoughts from you?
Not really. I just hope Notre Dame keeps rolling with another big win.
Yeah, as the Clemson fan, I'm obviously
Well,
hoping for them
that
to keep it up against FAU and keep rolling against them from the second half of Charleston Southern. We'll see if they do or not. But yeah, that wraps up this week's episode of College Football Roundup Week 3. Make sure you guys subscribe to American Football Network, The Football Expert, and College Football Roundup. Help us hit that goal on Roundup of 50 subs by the end of September. We appreciate all of you guys listening and watching today's video, and we will see you guys next week for week